everything that we perceive as contradictions, maybe it is the contradiction between destiny and free will, or any other type of contradiction that we perceive, is also a product of that supreme consciousness, and therefore it is within that consciousness. Now, how can two things within that fight each other or have contradictions? Now, Sri Ramakrishna has given a beautiful example for this. Again, his parables are very useful. That the cheek does not quarrel with the teeth because the teeth sometimes bite it. So you can't have contradictions if both the things are within you. Both are within the mouth, so they can't fight each other. So if everything, all our contradictions are within the divine, how there can be no contradictions? Namaste, my dear brothers and sisters. The love and blessings of the Mother and Sri Aurobindo to all of you. I have with me today Ojasvinee, who is a voracious reader, a very rare species these days. And in this short life that she has already lived, she has collected a vast storehouse of knowledge, some of it in colleges and a lot on her own. And amongst the many other things that she has done is a master's in philosophy. She has some questions, and in the course of trying to discuss, have a conversation around those questions, we hope we'll be able to give you something useful. Over to Ojasvinee.
Thank you so much, sir. So, while reading from my curriculum in philosophy, the most striking part usually I come across is about faith and free will. Because I'm at the stage where responsibility and duties means to me so much. It attracts a lot of attention from me. So I was reading this Enlightenment era philosopher Spinoza, who gives a deterministic point of view to reality. According to him, reality is predetermined. So he completely pulls off this concept called free will. Then he builds upon Leibniz monadology, where monads are every individual is a monad, and monad is something which consists within itself the whole universe. And all monads are kind of orchestrated by God in a sequence such that everything falls out to be predetermined. Everything is according to a plan. So here's my question: like, life is a mystery, future is a mystery. So how much has this free will here its role to play, and how much it goes to fate or destiny? So yes.
Yes, I mean, you made an important point when you said that Spinoza wove his philosophy around the concept of monad. Each one of us is a monad, that is within a single individual is the entire universe. And along with that come the possibilities and to some extent the script for that individual, which is already there, determined by that universal consciousness. And therefore, we just have to play it out. And in that sense, there's a lot of importance given to destiny. We're just playing out a script which has already been prepared for us in the type of monad that we are, or the fraction of that universal consciousness that we will express in our lives. Now, that is to some extent a fact, but same time, this question about to what extent we are just playing out a predetermined script and to what extent we have a free will is an eternal question. And to some extent, both are a fact. And they are not irreconcilable, because the fact that we are manifestations of the same divine, or that our divine essence, the soul, is a spark of the divine and therefore carries with it all the knowledge and the power and the guidance that can come from that all-knowing source, and the concept of monad, they're not irreconcilable. They're just different ways of putting essentially the same thing. But then, does that mean that we have no free will? We do have a free will, and that's how we can decide on so many things. The question is how we use the free will. As you said, whether I use it to fulfill my responsibilities in the world, my duty, do my duties well, or use it for something else. And to some extent, we are all using our free will, and that is also a fact. Now, how we can reconcile the two is that the universal consciousness which is within us has within it also the possibility of free will. The fraction of that consciousness which human beings manifest has that built into it. So, for example, a computer may seem as if it is able to think. It sometimes, tells you, you tell it to close a file. Do you want to say what you've written? Now, it's telling you what you had forgotten. So if you know the computer is thinking on my behalf, it's giving me a warning whether I want to save or I just want to close the file. Now, it seems to think, but the computer is a machine. It can't think. It has been programmed to give you that warning. So in the same way, we have also been programmed. So the divine has programmed us in such a way that the fraction of that universal consciousness which human beings will manifest, and to some extent, I think many animals also do, especially the higher animals, they will use their free will. For example, whom the dog will lick and whom the dog will bite, that is the dog's free will in a way. So you can say that at least the higher animals which seem to be able to think have been also given this free will. But then another way to look at it would be we are able to exercise this free will because because we have been programmed that way. So the credit goes to the programmer and not to us. We feel that it is my free will that I'm exerting, but actually, from a higher plane, it is also something which has already been determined. So both determinism and free will are a fact. Uh, Maybe you'd like to add something, or maybe I have raised some further questions.
There's another question coming to my mind is when both of them are true, fate is also a reality and free will is also reality. But generally, I have always seen this, and everybody see it in uh in a contradictory term. Like these two things occupy a place opposite to each other. So how do they actually work out? How do these opposite, apparently opposite, I don't know if actually they're opposite, how these apparently opposite factors are working to shape the reality? Like what's going to happen to me? How much role the free will has, and like what proportion is it something quantitative, or how this everything works?
Yes, on that, I think I can tell you a little story which I picked up from Manoj Das' book, The Tales That the Mystics Told. In that one, there are two close friends, and they go and pester Swamiji, Rishi living, a sage living in a forest. They know that he can foretell the future, so they go and pester him and somehow extract it out of him what their future is like. Although that uh, sage doesn't want to do this type of things, but they somehow compel him. And he tells them, "Well, what I can tell you is that after 1 year, one of you will be dead," and he tells the other one, "You will be a king." So this person who has been told that he will live only for a year, he thinks that, well, life is so short, I have got advance notice now. And so he starts becoming a better person. He's, he now becomes more loving, more caring, more willing to share, becomes more generous. And then, if he has hurt somebody in the past, he apologizes to that person. If somebody hurt him, he's really very willing to forgive and tells that person, all is forgotten and forgiven. Don't worry, we are friends again. So, he becomes a much better person. On the other hand, the one who has been told that he'll be a king after a year becomes very arrogant. He becomes arrogant with his friends and anyone whom he knows and tells them, well, uh, now I'll tell you what I can do after a year. So he's already giving them warnings for taking revenge for the slightest hurt that anybody has caused him, or he has perceived that somebody is against him in any way. So he starts threatening those people. Now, it so happens that after some time, this person who has been told that he'll be the king, he spots a big plot of land which he can afford to buy. And he tells his friend that I found this piece of land on which I can construct my palace. And I want you to come with me and tell me whether it is suitable and so on, and how we can design the palace on that land. So he goes with that friend of his. And then, they while they are scrutinizing that place, they come across a place where on digging a little, they find a pot of gold. And he says, see, this place is actually destined to be my palace. And here there's some gold which will make a very good crown for me. But just at that moment, some robbers appear there. And, and they want to take away that pot of gold. and therefore they put up a big fight with these people, and the one who takes sort of the lead role in that fight, and not worrying about whether he will die, is the friend who has been told that you'll die within a year. So he thinks that maybe in any case I have to die, and maybe this is how I'm destined to die. So he takes the lead role, and the robbers are chased away. The pot of gold is still there. So this person now comes back, and but at the same time, this person now has some scratches on his body, some minor injuries because of the fight that he had put up, the one who was destined to die after a year. Now, 1 year is over, and neither the one who has been told he'll die dies, nor does the other one become the king. So they go to the same sage and tell him that, see, what you had told has not happened. So he says that, well, because of what you were doing during the year, the one who had to die did not die because of what he did, and therefore he got away with a few injuries on his body. On the other hand, the one he had to become a king did not become the king, he was just left with a pot of gold. So the destiny was there, but at the same time, the destiny got modified by by how they lived for that 1 year. So both are a fact.
Now I see a fresh point of view towards destiny. Destiny is not something that's fixed. I see that. But sir, then there are this thing, astrology, horoscopes, and like they read stars. So if something is determined, it and because universe is interconnected, so maybe like does it has some currency, like because things are some kind they have some kind of determinism, and because universe is related, our fate is written in the stars, like astrologers do something and that sometimes that comes true.
Well, astrology is not baseless, it does have a foundation. And at the same time, it has not been looked upon with a great deal of respect for understandable reasons. And that is because for living a really meaningful life, to believe in free will is much more helpful and than believing in destiny or the astrologer's prediction. Why? Because if we do that, then we become resigned to our fate. And if you start believing in the astrologer's prediction or you believed entirely in destiny, then we become resigned to our fate and have no initiative or enthusiasm left for doing anything meaningful. So when it comes to making choices in life, that is a fact, and it is through the choices that we make that we also fulfill the purpose of life, which is spiritual growth. That is by making choices as far as possible on the basis of the guidance that comes from within, from our divine essence, on the soul, or what we sometimes call the inner voice or the voice of the deepest self. That gives us the most authentic guidance for the type of choices that will be based on love, on universal love, which will get expressed by giving what we have to those who need it. And that is what fulfills the purpose of life. And we will make those choices only if we believe in free will. Otherwise, we can do anything, including things which are totally against this inner voice, and say, well, I was destined to do it and therefore I did it. So we can easily blame destiny for everything. So, in fact, the most practical approach to the whole situation is that since both are a fact, that we look upon the past as destiny. So, what is over is over. Nobody can change the past, not even God. So, let's not have regrets about the past or keep harping on the past and waste our time and energy. So, look upon the past as destiny and look upon the future as free will, that we can determine the type of future we'll have. So, if destiny modifies it, applies some mid course corrections, whatever way you look at it, to the way we want to shape our future, we'll be able to accept it through surrender to the divine, which is also a part of the spiritual path, and in many other ways. Not only surrender to the divine will, but also to the surrender to the divine wisdom, which can determine better, which knows better what is good for us than we ourselves do. So we'll be able to reconcile to deviations from what we want to do, but at the same time, we will not give up our free will. And if we uh, are honest to that inner voice, we'll give an expression to our free will based on that inner voice instead of the superficial, sometimes egoistic uh, demands of the emotional part of the being and the intellect. So the inner voice, which is based on universal love, will have a precedence uh, if we use that free will, and we will not blame our destiny for the egoistic demands, fulfillment of egoistic demands which we indulge in, or try to sort of fulfill our desires no matter how, and then blame it on destiny. So we'll not be doing that, because we are also believing in free will. So we'll be able to willing to take responsibility for what goes wrong.
So if there was only one thing I could have taken from this enlightening conversation, it was this new point of view that past, looking at past as destiny, because destiny has forever been a concept of future for me. So looking at past as destiny and free will in future. And yes, that's true. As we have seen in the story, if we resign to fate and destiny, we would become lazy, and that's gonna be changing the path, our path. So coming to free will, if I accept free will truly, the another burden comes to me is about this success and failure. My what's the credit that I take to my success, and what's the proportion of guilt and blame that falls on my shoulder when it comes to failures. So, sir, can you please put some light on that?
Again, sort of the practical wisdom is, since both destiny and free will are true, uh, and what we do uh, is because of the way we have been constituted, or because of the type of talents and gifts we have received, for which we had to make no special effort, apparently. But all the same, if we have put in some effort in previous lives, we are blissfully ignorant about it, which is good. So if there is success, if we view it as something which is a divine grace that has enabled us to achieve, because all the talents and gifts that we enabled us to achieve that success were given to us, and the circumstances in which those gifts could be used, they were given to us, and the fact that it translated into this success is also something that came to us, it will give us a great deal of humility, as well as if this success has given us something in excess, then we'll be also willing to share it, because we would feel that it is to be given to the one who has given it to us. So this success then becomes an opportunity for further spiritual growth, for extending our love, which can be expressed in a certain way because of this success. So it gives us this humility, as well as the possibility of using this in a better way, with the right type of consciousness and attitude, for further spiritual growth. Why I said right type of consciousness is because suppose this success involves getting a lot of money. Then if the person says that, well, now that I have this much money, let me give it in charity, or some of it in charity. Now, if the person does it because he thinks that now I'm giving in charity and that boosts his own ego, then that will mean one thing. Whereas if he thinks that this money has come to me because the talent to make money was given to me, and that it translated into this actually happening, it was because of divine grace. And therefore, I am privileged to be an instrument who can pass on what has been given to me to somebody else who needs it. I can express my love to that person through this. If he looks at it that way, then he's doing the same thing, but with a different attitude. So success should be looked at more as a part of something that has been given to us, that was destined to happen. Whereas when it comes to failure, or particularly something which we should not have done, because we're all making mistakes, and later on, in retrospect, we feel, well, I should not have done it, because it was not the right thing to do, not the best thing to do. And that happens particularly to people like you, who are sort of very conscious of doing what is right. Why? Because then you become very sensitive to even minor infringements, which an ordinary person will feel, well, this is ordinary, this is normal, everybody does it. The person will brush it off like that. But if you're very sensitive, then even those minor infringements start hurting you. Now, for that, to blame destiny would not be right. The constructive approach would be, yes, my inner voice told me not to do it, but somehow I ignored that, or paid no attention to it, or maybe I had sent it to sleep and therefore I did not even hear that voice. But on a future opportunity like this, I will do something differently. So the constructive approach is not again to regret about what has happened, or live with that constant sense of guilt, but at the same time, resolve that next time I'll do it in a better way. So the failure and wrongdoings, for that, one can accept the blame, take the responsibility, and resolve to do better.
Thank you so much, sir. This answer has personally fetched me a lot of relief. But now I was thinking that you have reconciled this virtue of humility with free will. But another virtue which we have always been taught as a child is taking responsibility, taking the charge. So, with that comes, while I was reading Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna says to Arjun that surrender to the divine, because surrender to the fate, kind of surrender to the destiny, because you only perform actions and the result, the fruit, is not up to you. But while I was reading that at that time, I used to feel that this is some kind of escapism. Like these words are to soothe people, to make people feel light. But that's the reality. Today I see it. But because I couldn't make it out at that time, I want you to explain that how it's not escaping, it's not rubbing off your responsibility off your shoulders. It's reality. It's because while I was reading, I couldn't put my faith on that constantly, because this virtue of being responsible was in conflict with accepting that there is something much bigger than me, much bigger than my free will. How it's not escapism.
Again, it depends upon the situation and our attitude. Because sometimes, you see, when we are told to be humble, we think that we have to be humble to everybody. But true humility is humility to the divine. In the same way, be responsible to the divine. Surrender to the divine, not to authority and injustice. So, in all these questions, surrender to whom? Humility with whom? Responsible to whom? Ultimately, we are there, responsible to the divine. So, we have to surrender to the divine, be humble with the divine. Now, you'll say that the divine is there in everyone. So, it means that we have to do the exercise these to the divinity in those human beings. But then we have to see what part of that divinity is being manifested, which is compelling us to be responsible to that person and so on. So, which means that ultimately we still have to use our free will, and as a guide to use that inner guide, which we all have, which is the soul, and which has a dynamic aspect, as Shurabandhu and the mother have pointed out a lot, that the dynamic aspect is the psychic being. But then, having said that, up to a certain point, two things can help us, because being fully aware of that inner guide and organizing all our life around it is more than a lifetime's job. And so, therefore, we have stopgap arrangements, or you can say steps along that ladder. And two things are important there. One is the norms of the society, the ethical codes that we have available, which we call Shastra in our tradition. So you find that in the Gita, till about this, at least the 16th, perhaps also in the 17th chapter, Arjuna is told to follow the Shastra because of reasonable guide. But then in the 18th chapter comes that very surprising, in a way, verse, Sarva Dharman Paritejya Mamekam Sharanam Vraja. Give up all dharmas, Sarva Dharman Paritejya, Sare Dharm Chhod Do, abandon all dharmas, and Mamekam Sharanam Vraja, take refuge in me alone. Now, a religious scripture saying that abandon all dharmas, because dharma these days we translate as a religion, seems very paradoxical. But dharma in the Indian tradition actually meant the sense of right and wrong, which means give up every sense of right and wrong that you have picked up from the surroundings, from Shastras, and so on. Forget all that. That's exactly what Sri Krishna is telling him. But instead, do what? Take refuge in me, which means listen to what I am telling you to do. And Arjuna had the good fortune of having Sri Krishna in front of him, so he could tell him fight, and he fought. But then how about us who do not have that good fortune? We have our Sri Krishna within us, the divine within us, our soul. So listen to that. But that comes in the 18th chapter, towards the end of the 18th chapter, which means that till we have evolved to the extent, till we have understood this message to the extent that Arjun had by the 18th chapter, we are not really qualified to, fully qualified at least, to exercise that freedom. Which means this freedom has to be exercised with discretion. And if we are not very sure, either follow the Shastra or follow some other wise person's advice whom you trust more than your own intellect, or at least use your own intellect, your own reasoning capacity at its refined best. That's why the mother says, up to a long time in life, you can use reason as your guide. Because if reason is used properly, it will prevent us from many wrongdoings. It will be a good guide. And why she says up to a long time in life, not for throughout your life, because you can evolve to a stage when you do not need the crutch of reasoning, because the soul is all knowing. It does not require that crutch. So without going into any reasoning, the soul will guide us to what the right thing is. So if you have are sufficiently aware of that inner voice and can organize your life around it, that has become habitual to you, then you can forget even reason. You can forget the Shastras, you can forget uh, all the so-called dharmas, and you can forget about the reason. You can forget all the normal social norms. You can forget about everything that has been guiding you. And that is what explains, why certain things which may not be considered right for the ordinary person were right for some very great people, for sages. For example, for an ordinary person to abandon his wife and infant baby would be considered escapism, escaping worldly responsibility. But it was not wrong for Lord Buddha to do it. He did exactly that, but for him it was right, because that was his inner call. That is what he was destined to do in the world. And that was much more important than taking the normal care of his wife and child and to look after the kingdom which his father was very eager to pass him on.
Because of my high parental attachment, the story of Buddha leaving his father, like I used to question his compassion. Like, wasn't he compassionate towards his father? But now I understand that. Yeah. You have answered this question of a very younger self of mine. So thank you for that.
But anyway, the fact that you started thinking about these questions at a very young age again shows that you are a special person, a specially crafted instrument of the divine who has come in this world with a high level of spiritual evolution, which is the result of the homework you already put in your previous lives, because this is a journey that of the soul which continues from life to life. And we generally take off in this life where we left it in the previous one. And in the previous one, you left it at a level that uh, gave you that sort of a mind which could sort of channelize those aspects of the supreme consciousness which started manifesting in this form in early childhood. So these tendencies of early childhood to think about such questions early in life is normal. At the same time, we are influenced by our environment, so these conflicts are also normal. And I'm sure you'll work out these conflicts, resolve them, and eventually discover your inner calling, for which success and failure both can be helpful.
Thank you, sir. So perhaps that might be true, but as a kid, I didn't know what spirituality means. But I always used to like ponder upon what could be the reason of my these kind of queries, conundrums, and dilemmas. So I thought I was a very emotional person. That's why these kind of questions are coming to me. But now that I have discovered what spirituality is, I'm very inclined towards it.
And being emotional is nothing wrong, even if you are emotional, because we need strong emotions even on the spiritual path. The only thing is, those emotions have to be purified and refined, because the emotions can also reflect the light of the soul within, just as the intellect can. The highest reaches of reason are reflecting actually that light from within. In the same way, the highest form of emotions is also reflecting that, and love is what essentially translates into. It also translates into vitality, enthusiasm, commitment, dedication, and all these things are required also on the spiritual path. So they require these qualities are required in worldly action. They are required also on the spiritual path. So there's nothing wrong with being strongly emotional. It's just a question of what you are emotional about, where your dedication and passion and commitment lies. That is what distinguishes one person from the other. And if it is to be happy, again, there's nothing wrong with that, because uh, it's not that spirituality means that you have to tolerate unhappiness. It's just that what makes you happy is different. Yes. The choices that you make to be happy are different from what an ordinary average person might.
That's again another helpful insight, because in our world, emotions are downgraded. Emotionally being emotionally driven is seen as immature. So I always had this worry, am I doing something wrong? And I many a times I tried to abandon my emotions, but later I realized no, that's my identity, so that couldn't be done.
Yeah, not only in ordinary world, we are told to use our head, not to get carried away by feelings. Even many religious and spiritual traditions would have it that emotions should be killed because they lead us astray. But not in Sri Aurobindo and the mother's philosophy. That is all embracing. That accepts also emotions as a valid tool that has been given to us because it is emotions that translate into all vitality and enthusiasm. And that is just as useful on the spiritual path, as I said, as in the worldly action. That is what devotion is all about. Bhakti marg or
Yes,
devotion.
yes.
And no matter which path you are walking, devotion is always a very helpful component. Or, Sri Aurobindo and the mother often call the emotional part of the being the vital. The vital can be a very strong collaborator on the spiritual path.
We see that. So while asserting our free will, the many of the tools we use like emotions, intellect, and psychic being is also a tool. While we use it while asserting our free will.
Psychic being, you see, it will be a little sort of degrading it to call it just a tool. It is a guide. It's an inner guide, the most reliable guide. The tools are the body and the mind, because that is what performs action. The action in the world is through the body and the mind, but what the body and the mind should do, for that the best guide that we have is the psychic being.
Now I see that. So coming back to our topic, this is the old saying, everything happens for a reason. In modern times, this great scientist Einstein said God doesn't play dice. Like it's not a game. It's not happening. The chances is not reality. Everything happens for a reason. And modern theories are coming up like synchronicity, like butterfly effect. So how philosophy of Sri Aurobindo and our Indian scriptures, how they do they give an explanation to these kinds of phenomena like synchronicity, everything happening for a reason.
Well, everything happening for a reason is also true because at least that is the way to accept it. The thing has already happened.
Okay.
So, as we discussed a short while back, we can take it as destiny.
Mhm.
Now, destiny can be looked at again as something which was divine will. So, God is a dictator, he can do what he wants. But we can also say that the divine also has supreme wisdom, and therefore there was supreme wisdom behind it, which means there was a reason behind it. We may not be able to see that reason. So, that makes that acceptance of what has already happened much easier if we look at it. So, that's the way one can interpret Einstein's insight that everything happens for a reason. And that applies particularly to misfortune and failure. Because that is where we find it difficult to accept. If something nice has happened, we are eager to take credit. Even if we do not take credit, at least we are very happy that the divine did it for us, and we can be grateful to the divine. But we do not question it. The questioning comes only when something has gone wrong. And to believe that that also happened for a reason is very helpful. And again, can maybe give you an example of a failure from recent history. Our former president, APJ Abdul Kalam, he wanted to be a fighter pilot when he finished with his course in engineering. But he failed by a hair's breadth. In the entrance test, probably was 10th or something, and there were only 8 seats. He was on the waiting list, but nobody left, those who were selected. And that's how he could not become a fighter pilot. And then, he was very dejected, and he reached Rishikesh and met a Swamiji there, who told him that this has a great meaning in your life. And it true enough, it turned out to be having a great meaning, because if he had become a fighter pilot, he would not have become a scientist in space research. If he had not become a scientist in space research, he would not have been as close to the political leadership as he became, because the nuclear uh, program is always something which requires a close sort of supervision and approval from the highest level, from the prime minister's level. So irrespective of which party was in power, he continued to be close to all of them. And that is how, when destiny sort of determined it, he was picked up as the presidential candidate. So he became the president because of having been in space research for such a long time. And then again, probably that was not his final calling. His final calling was to be a teacher. And it was because he became the president of India that after his term was over, he got one of the biggest classrooms in the world. He could travel to schools and colleges all over the world, use the media facilities to their hilt, and because of his position, he was heard. So he ended up doing a lot of what he was destined to do in the world, good to this world through teaching because of this. So if he had not been the president, he would not have got that big classroom. If he had not, if he had not worked in space research, he wouldn't have become the president, and he wouldn't have done space research if he had not failed to become a fighter pilot. So the failure did have a meaning in his life. So therefore, to believe that whatever happens in life is for a reason is a very good attitude, and it does have a reason because we don't know why it happened, but the divine knows better than us what is good for us. So we can accept it as an expression not only of the divine will, but also of the divine wisdom and surrender to it.
So this life story of Mr. APJ Abdul Kalam, it's very inspiring. And then there is a question, like we have seen everything is happening for a reason from a personal point of view, like how the reason is helping a person. But sir, does everything happen for a reason for the whole universe, like the natural calamities, like the war between Ukraine and Russia, or say climate change? Is it happening for a reason? Does it mean something to universe as a whole?
That question gets a little complex, but certainly, I mean, we look at it from the individual point of view. But then we are programmed in such a way that we'll also look at it from the broader point of view, as you are seeing. And that is why we are programmed that after a certain level of spiritual evolution, our love will not be restricted to relations which are determined by circumstances like, say, the family or our neighborhood or our clan or tribe or nation. It will not be determined by those things. It will be universal in nature. We are programmed that way, which means that we are programmed to think beyond ourselves. And which means that the divine design is not actually only for individuals. The individuals are a small cog in a giant wheel, which is fulfilling the divine will in human lives, in individual human lives. So that is a broader perspective. Then you say that what about the negative things like wars, etc.? Just as in individuals' lives, negative things happen and still the divine will is fulfilled, maybe not in one life over successive lives. In the same way, if something seems to be undivine, happening in the world, that's an expression of a collective free will of a large number of human beings. But then the divine is not in a hurry to fulfill its design. It has given us that free will, individual free will and collective free will. We'll keep making mistakes, and the divine will keep applying mid-course corrections. The divine is not in a hurry, and it has eternity at its disposal. So eventually the divine design will be fulfilled. But what is again practical wisdom is that instead of bothering with the entire design of the divine, we confine ourselves to what we can do to fulfill that design in our own individual lives.
So I've got most of my answers. Coming back to where we started from?
Spinoza.
Yes. So despite being this staunch advocator of determinism, he also brings freedom into his philosophy. Like he stands for individual freedom, mostly in spheres of ethics and politics. So he kind of tries to bring to reconcile these things together. So, sir, how is Aurobindo's philosophy? Is there some kind of reconciliation?
Yes, this has many questions actually within the question, but anyway, I'll try to take them up briefly one by one. One is that how is it that Spinoza, on one hand, lays so much emphasis on the concept of the monad, or which then translates in his philosophy into determinism, and then how he still uh, valued highly freedom in the area of ethics and politics. Now, this just shows our mental attitudes. You see, mentally, if we put forth a concept strongly, we want to try and appear consistent. And therefore, he wanted to remain consistent in his philosophy in emphasizing the monad concept. But at the same time, we are also products of our circumstances. He was a Renaissance philosopher. 17th century, was the beginning of the Europe, more or less the beginning of the European Renaissance. And freedom, particularly freedom to think, freedom to rationalize things, was a hallmark of that era in that part of the world. So he had picked up from the surroundings. But then for doing this, deciding what is right and wrong, religion had been banished, and therefore ethics, not religion, but ethics, which was based on rationality. So that he supported. And naturally, you can't support both a conscious ethical choice and destiny. So since you can't reconcile both, in spite of his philosophy being consistent with the relation to monad, he did concede that, well, you can use your free will to do the right thing, and for that you can use rationalistic ethics. In the same way, in politics, again, free will, which means that if the politician thinks that something will be good for the people, he can do it using his capacity to reason and his free will. The politician can't say that I did this because I was destined to do it, do something wrong for the people, which will harm the people, and take shelter under destiny. So he was there. Now, this just shows that different layers of the same person. One aspect, he wanted to maintain a certain consistency in his philosophy. On the other hand, where he saw an exception, he tried to also concede something different. And this happens quite often in Western philosophy, because in contrast with the ancient Indian philosophies, the intellectual excursions are the primary thing. They want to arrive at the highest truths. In fact, the highest truth is only one, so you can say the truth with the capital T. They want to arrive at that, but they think that mind is the instrument for it, and within mind, the capacity to reason is the highest tool. And so they exercise that reason a lot, take it to its highest possible reaches, and try to arrive at the truth.
That's what's termed as intellectual
Yes,
gymnastics.
it's an intellectual gymnastics. That is what the Western philosophers have done. And that is why these limitations remain, because reason, even at its highest reaches, can't perceive what something beyond reason, which is the direct communication with the divine, becoming one in your consciousness with the divine. The truth that can be revealed from there cannot be revealed by reason. You can go pretty high, but not there. And that is why very often they come pretty close to the highest truth, but after a lot of labor, intellectual labor. And one example which I often point out for that is, there's a book by Bertrand Russell, who was also one of the Western philosophers, who has written a book on the secret of happiness. And after about 200 pages of discussion, what is his final conclusion? That the true source of happiness is overcoming chronic self-absorption. Now, what he took 200 pages to arrive at, spiritual people, spiritual wisdom arrives at within a moment. Yes. Essentially, it is overcoming your ego and replacing it with its opposite, which is love. That is what it translates into, overcoming chronic self-absorption. Now, he took 200 pages of arguments to arrive there. So that's why it's a laborious process. And still it remains partial, and therefore you have to concede exceptions the way Spinoza has done. Now, the way Indian philosophy has worked is, experience is primary and intellectual excursion is secondary. So the rishi has the experience, and then some rishis have tried to reconcile their own observations and sometimes the observations of a large number of rishis to weave a philosophy into which those perceptions, those observations, rishis' observations, can fit in. And that's how we have the different systems of Indian philosophy. But one thing which is common to all of them is that experience is primary, and rationalization to work out a philosophy out of it is the second thing that has been done. It's secondary. It is a corollary. It is a product of that experience. So experience is primary. So that is why they have been able to arrive at the highest truth more easily, because they have not depended upon intellectual excursions for it. And you asked particularly about Sri Aurobindo and the mother, particularly Sri Aurobindo, who sort of is the one who put forth his philosophy in his works in the most elaborate form. One of the things that he achieves very well is reconciling all contradictions, because the highest truth actually has no internal contradictions. Everything that we perceive as contradictions, maybe it is the contradiction between destiny and free will, or any other type of contradiction that we perceive, is also a product of that supreme consciousness, and therefore it is within that consciousness. Now, how can two things within that fight each other or have contradictions? Sri Ramakrishna has given a beautiful example for this. Again, his parables are very useful. That the cheek does not quarrel with the teeth because the teeth sometimes bite it. So you can't have contradictions if both the things are within you. Both are within the mouth, so they can't fight each other. So if everything, all our contradictions are within the divine, how there can be no contradictions? So one of the things Sri Aurobindo has done is to reconcile all contradictions using rationality as the tool, because that is what will convince the modern mind. And that is what essentially the life divine is about, where he has reconciled all possible contradictions which the world has seen in the past in different spiritual philosophies. And then he has tried to show that how, yes, every philosophy had a certain element of truth, but somewhere missed some aspect of the truth. And therefore, you find contradictions and how the two can be reconciled. And he does in a very gentle manner. It's a very decent, sympathetic criticism. And that's another lesson one can learn, both how perceptive his reasoning is and how he reconciles these opposites through that gentle criticism of the different contradictory theories. And that he does sometimes by saying that if some theory which missed some bit of the truth, he says why it was natural to think that way, why it was natural to weave that philosophy, why it is very natural to do it. So he makes up a case for that philosophy which is actually going to reject or reconcile with something else. He makes up a very good case, better than probably the proponents of that philosophy could have done. And then after having done that, he starts demolishing it, but. So then come the buts, which show that where was those little chinks which were there because of some aspect of the truth having been missed. So that is his approach. So he has been sort of, just as the total truth, that is the truth with the capital T, or the absolute reality, or the infinite, cannot have any contradictions within itself. In the same way, in Sri Aurobindo's philosophy, there are no contradictions. All contradictions have been reconciled, and then he comes up with a philosophy which apparently has no contradictions left within it.
Yes, now I see. So now I have a totally new perspective to read my old curriculum with a fresh viewpoint.
Yes, it's unfortunate that even in Indian universities, we learn
Yes.
probably much more than about Western philosophy than about Indian philosophy. But then people like you who are not fully satisfied, they don't get all their answers from what they read in college, explore further and eventually find that you discover the answers in ancient Indian wisdom. That has happened to many people. That happened to a visitor from the US. Her name was Judith Tyberg. She came to Banaras Hindu University to find answers to questions which she could not find while living in the West after having gone through whatever she could do there. So she thought, let me go to the place where I'll find it. She came to Banaras Hindu University probably to do a master's course or something. But then she found that even there, she couldn't get the answers. But then, as you know, we may call it destiny, serendipity, or whatever. But then these things are probably designed. So now it is past, so we can say that it was a part of the divine design, it was destiny. Somebody placed in her hands Sri Aurobindo's The Life Divine. And she found all the answers there. And so the result was that immediately after getting her degree, she went and spent a long time in Sri Aurobindo Ashram, Pondicherry. And around 1950 or something, she went back to the US and set up there a center called the East-West Cultural Center, which now has taken the shape of Sri Aurobindo Center of Los Angeles in California. She set up that center there. So she found the answers in ancient Indian wisdom, particularly as Sri Aurobindo had put it. Because when she talked about all those questions, her professors were baffled. They said that, well, we can't give you a thesis topic which will answer these questions. So they were baffled. Same thing happened to Professor Indra Sen, who was a professor of both philosophy and psychology at the Delhi University in the 1940s. Those days, you could be a specialist in both these subjects that are interrelated. And so he was a professor of both. Again, many questions he had which had not been answered, but what he had read and studied and was teaching his students. So he went to philosophers and psychologists in whom he had the hope that they will be able to answer, like Carl Jung, that psychologist. So Carl Jung was alive that time. And so he asked him also, even that could not satisfy him. Then again, he found the answers in Sri Aurobindo's The Life Divine. And that's how he decided to wrap up his job prematurely in the University of Delhi and shift to Pondicherry. and was probably the first one to give a sort of formal shape to what we now call integral psychology based on Sri Aurobindo's ideas. So it has happened, this experience many have gone through, that what they learn in school and college in philosophy or psychology is unable to answer their questions. And then they discover, because much of what we teach, unfortunately, even today, is Western philosophy and Western psychology. And then eventually they find those answers in ancient Indian wisdom.
So these two stories of life journey of these two people, it actually sums up our discussion. Like they asserted their free will to find out what they wanted, to find out their answer. Then at last their destiny, the deterministic part of the universe, pushed them into, or when they like answered, opened the doors for them. They opened the doors and brought to them what they were seeking. So that's how the reality is. That's the mixture of free will and fate. Both of them are reality,
Sure.
actually.
So I think you have summed it up very well. So finally, I mean, we can just say that although everything is deterministic in a sense, but it depends upon which plane you are looking at it from. From the highest plane, yes, everything is deterministic because even free will is a part of that determinism, which has been planted in us by the divine. But from a lower ordinary mental plane, which is the plane at which most of us are most of the time, from that plane, it is we have both these realities, destiny and free will. Better to look upon both as realities and look upon the past as destiny and the future as free will, because both are true. But then as we evolve further, we'll reach a point where we'll find that even the so-called free will, which I seem to have used to reach where I have reached, was happened because of those little circumstances, those coincidences, those serendipities, those coincidences which seemed accidental at that time, but they were a part of that determinism. That's why it happened to me, and that's how I reached here. So at that time, I thought it was using my free will, but actually that was also a part of determinism. So from the higher plane, everything will appear deterministic. That is the conclusion Sri Aurobindo comes to also in the essays on the Gita, where he has an extensive discussion on determinism and free will. And he says that, well, it depends upon the plane. From the highest plane, everything truly is deterministic. It has been determined by the divine. But then at the mental plane at which we ordinarily live most of the time, it's good to sort of have that division and know where to take recourse under destiny and where to look at free will as something which we can do to change our destiny. So on destiny also, that's why he said that it's not an irrevocable document. Human aspiration is a part of our destiny.
So for now, this quenches my thirst of queries. Like like cool water from earthen pot, one can get in the hot weather. So
It's
I'll
all
read
Mother's
more.
grace that it is there.
So uh, I'll read more about Indian philosophy about this topic. I need some time to churn more upon this. So thank you so
Sure,
much.
reading alone is not enough. You again
Yeah.
said something very valuable. Digesting that knowledge through that inner churning
Yeah.
is important.
Yeah.
And then trying to live it and experience it is what takes us gradually towards that point where your consciousness changes enough for your life to be organized around it.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for this enlightening conversation. Thank you so much for answering my questions.
Thank you, Ojasvinee. True to your name, you have a lot of ojas in you, that energy, that vitality, and the mother's grace will help you. You are a sweet child of the sweet mother. Thank you.
Thank you.